Boker Tov, today's daf is Daf Mem Ches and Gitin, as we learned for Shlomo Velas ben Rumen, Yosef Israel ben Chaim Michal. We're down to Lemika Tanoi, about almost 20 lines down on the page. Lemika Tanoi, the machlokas we had yesterday between B'yochim and Shlokish, we repeated it twice. Amocher Sadela Paris, if you sell your field, not really selling the field, only for the Paris, for the produce that it's produced, you don't really own the property. Is that considered like a kinyan aguf? So you would, when it comes to bikurim, when it says you would make the bracha, as you would read the psukim together when you bring the bikurim with the psukim. Or Rish Lakish says no, maybe be'enu korei, you bring the bikurim but you don't read the psukim because kinyan paris is not kinyan aguf. That's a machlokas tanan. But where do we have this? Let's understand something. When you sanctify a field, you have the opportunity to redeem it. If you don't redeem it and the Gizbar of Bezdin sells it to somebody else, when it comes to Yovel, who does it go back to? It goes back to the base of Migdash, and they divide it up among the Kohanim, and the Kohanim then own it like an ancestral field, like it's their own family's field. That's the halacha. If you're makdish, you sanctify a field that you own. Let's say you bought a field that you own. You own it now. You bought a field. If you bought a field and you sanctified it, when it comes to Yovel, it goes back to the people you bought it from. It goes back to the original owners. So there's a difference between a field of your family. If you sanctify a field that was in your family, it was an ancestral field. It was, back from the time that Yeshua came down in your family. If you're makdish field like that, in both cases, if you're makdish field, you have a chance to redeem it. But if you don't redeem it and the Gizbar sells it to somebody else, what happens in Yovel? If it's an ancestral field that belonged in your family, then it gets divided among the Kohanim in Yovel. If it's a field that you bought, it goes back to the original owner. So it says, what happens? Let's say you bought a field from your father. Now, a field from your father is an ancestral field, right? You are set to inherit it eventually. But let's say you bought it from your father during his lifetime. And now you're makdish it. Then your father died anyway, but it was already your field before, and you were makdish it. What's the halacha? Is that like a sada achuza, like an ancestral field that if you don't redeem it, the Gizbar, and he sells it to somebody else, it goes back to the Kohanim in Yovel? He says, even though you bought it from your father. If you bought it from Yankel and you were makdish it and you didn't redeem it, so it comes to Yovel, it goes back to Yankel, right? But so that's the question here. You bought it from your father, but it was set to be an ancestral field, belonged to him, and then he died. But you were makdish it before he died. It's considered like a sada chuza. It's like you inherit. It's like a field that you inherited. It's not you negate basically the purchasing aspect of it. If this field that you bought, a purchased field, that's not fit for inheritance. It's a field that you bought from some guy, Yankel. So that's not fit for being a sadachuz. This field that you bought for your father was eventually going to be yours anyway. It was a field that was fit to be a sadachuza. Rav Shimon say. They say that a field that you bought, that is, you were makdish it before your father died, before you inherited it. When you were makdish it, it was a purchase field. But since it was said it was fit to be an ancestral field that goes back to the Kohanim, that's halacha. It goes back like to the Kohanim. Rav Meir says no. He doesn't say that case. Meir says a slightly different case. Meir says, you bought a field from your father. It was originally an ancestral field. And then your father died. You were makdish it after you inherited it, basically. In other words, in both cases, you bought the field from your father. In both cases, your father died. But were you makdish it before? Rav Shimon say, even if you're makdish it before your father died, before you inherited it, it still is halacha like an inheritance field, an ancestral field that goes back to the Kohanim and Yovel if you didn't redeem it. Rav Meir says no, only if you bought a field from your father and then he died before you were makdish. The same pasuk. If it's a purchased field that's not a sadachuza, that's not an ancestral field. Sadashaena sadachuza, a field that's not an ancestral field. It's a field that you bought from Yankel. Yasazushi sadachuza, but this is a sadachuza. It's eventually going to be, but it's only it only works if you're makdish it after you inherited it. Your father died before. Rav Shimon, they say that if your father died first and then you're makdish, I don't need a pasuk for that. That's obviously a sort of chuza. Why is that? My lava kumifiki. Maybe this machlokas between Rabbi Rav Shimon on the one hand, Rav Meir on the other hand is a found machlokas. The machlokas said yesterday between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. The Rav Meir says, listen, when you bought it from your father, you bought it during Yovel, it's only Kinyan Paris, right? So, but Kinyan Paris is Kinyan Aguf, like Rabbi Yochanan. Rav Meir holds Kinyan Paris is like a Kinyan Aguf Dami. Ubahaba Mises Aviv Rula Yoris. What did he inherit? He bought it from his father. And if we say that he bought, now when he bought it, since it's in Yovel, anyway, it's only going to be Kinyan Paris. He doesn't really, it's only going to own it until Yovel anyway. Whoever it's going to go back to, right? It's going to go back to the family, let's say, or to the Kohanim in this case, if it's if he doesn't redeem it. So who does it go back to? It goes back. Goes back like an ancestral field. So what did he inherit here? He didn't inherit anything. He says, it's like he owned it already. He didn't inherit anything when his father died. Why? Because he already owned it. Since he had a Kinyan Paris, he bought it from his father, even though it's only Kinyan Paris, but if Kinyan Paris is like Kinyan Aguf, it's like he owned it. So when his father died, what did he get? Nothing. Since he didn't gain anything, so I need a pasuk to tell me that if his father died, he was makdashit, you know what? It's still considered sarachuza. Why? Because he didn't inherit anything from his father. He already owned it. So if he already owned it, it should be like a purchase field which goes back to the original owners at Yovel, not go back to the Kohanim. If I need a pasuk to tell me, no, that Mace of it, even if he wasn't makdashit till after his father died, I still need a pasuk to tell me that that's a sarachuza. Normally a sarachuza is what? You inherited a field from your father. You didn't buy anything from him, you inherited. You were makdashit. If you didn't redeem it, and Gizber sold it to other people, it goes back to the Kohanim at Yovel. But over here, you bought it from your father. Okay, but what happened? You bought it from your father. When you bought it from your father, even though it's only Kinyan Paris, it's during Yovel, everything is a Kinyan Paris. There's no permanent land purchase. But if a Kinyan Paris is Kinyan Aguf, it's like you owned it. So like Rabbi Yochanan holds, if you owned it, then when your father died, what did you get? Nothing. So if you got nothing, so maybe this is not a sarachuza, it's a purchase field. You already owned it before. Kamashwan, no, the pasuk tells me that since at the end of the day, your father died before you were makdashit, so to speak, you got an inheritance here, and it's considered an inheritance field, even though logically it wouldn't work. Rabbi Shimon Savar came past Kinyan Guftami. No, when you bought it from your father, that's nothing. It's not Kinyan Guftami. Now, when the father dies, because now he's inheriting something, because he only had a Kinyan Paris anyway. It's not a Kinyan Guf, and now he's inheriting something. If his father died, then you're makdish. Of course, I don't need a pasuk as a sarachuz. Of course, if your father died, you inherited something before you were makdish. Of course, that's the sarachuza. What's the pasuk that teach me? A bigger chiddush. You bought it from your father, and you were makdish before your father died. That's a chiddush. That's still considered sarachuza. Who that's what you need it for? So that's the machlokas here. Just like in machlokas Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, whether Kinyan Paris is Kinyan Guftami, the same way Rabbi Rav Shimon say Kinyan Paris is Lavke Kinyan Guftami. So therefore, when your father died, you inherited something. So if you were makdish only after your father died, certainly that's a sarachuza, right? Because you didn't really own it before. Therefore, the pasuk is telling me even more than that. Even if you were makdish before your father died, but according to a mayor, that your father, if a mayor holds that Kinyan Paris is Kinyan Guftami, when you bought it from your father, you own it now. When your father died, you didn't get anything. You didn't gain anything. If you didn't gain anything, all he's telling you is that the pasuk is simply telling you that if your father died, and then you were makdashit, you know what? Even though you didn't gain anything when your father died, but if he died before you were makdashit, it's still considered a sarachuza. That's the machlokas. Says the Gemara, no, that's not the case. You want to say the machlokas between Rav Shimon hold Kinyan Paris Lavke Kinyan Guftami, and Meir holds Kinyan Guftami. No. La'olam, I'll tell you that Rabbi Shimon also hold the Kinyan Paris is Kinyan Guftami. You could say that it come out that way, even like Rabbi Yochanan. They were looking at the pasuk. The pasuk says again. The pasuk he quotes at the top there in the middle of the page by Yikra Chosayim. If it's a purchase field, that it's no inheritance whatsoever. It's a field you bought from your uncle. Then the rule is it goes back in Yovel to the original owner. Sada she'ena ru'uya leo sada chuza. What's that lashon? It says im esada miknaso asher lo misteh chuzaso. Just say im esteh miknaso asher lo chuzaso. What is asher lo misteh chuzaso? That's what Rabbi Yehuda Darshan. Rabbi Shimon Karshka, they look at the pasuk of Darshan. That word misteh is extra. My misteh chuzaso. To tell me sada she'ena ru'uya leo sada achuza. What is considered a possession field, a field that you bought, you purchased, which goes back to the original owners in Yovel, doesn't go to the Kohanim. If you were makdash and you didn't redeem it, doesn't go to the Kohanim, it goes back to the original owner. What's that? It's only a sada miknaso, which is not fit to be a sada chuza. Yatzazu, but when you bought it from your father, right, even though you were makdash before he died, but it's a sada that's ra'ui, it's fit, it's qualified to become a sada chuza, because if your father dies, it's yours. So therefore, they're darshaning the pasuk, and they're not necessarily arguing about the concept of kinyan peres kinyan yibtum. So we have this machlokas again between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan says kinyan peres is kinyan yibtum, and of course everybody agrees, right? Where's the nafkamina? Nafkamina is when you bought a field only for you bought it for 5 or 10 years just to work the field, just to get the pears, but you don't really own the field, or during Yovel, right? During Yovel, we said yesterday, during Yovel, everything is, since it's going back to Yovel, everything is a kinyan peres. Is that a kinyan aguf or not? So we gave answers, and we said, well, it could be speaking about when everybody would agree, right? When I bought something permanently, for example, today, if you bought a field and there's no Yovel doesn't apply today. So at that point, once the Reuben and Shimon, once they went into exile, there was no more Yovel. First, the ones at Aber Yarden, and once they went, there's no more rule of Yovel. Then everybody could agree that the kinyan peres is like kinyan aguf, because if you bought the field, in other words, it's not just from base. You bought a field permanently, a regular purchase, not when I bought it for just for 5 or 10 years. I bought a field like today. You buy a field, right? You buy a field today, you own it in perpetuity. That would be a kinyan. That would be a kinyan aguf. That's not a kinyan peros. That would be a kinyan aguf. So now the Gemara says, "Amar Rabbi Yosef," about 7 lines from the bottom of the page. Amar Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yochanan holds kinyan peros if you bought something just for the peros. Again, either any purchase during Yovel or a purchase for 5 or 10 years during not during Yovel. If Rabbi Yochanan wouldn't say he wouldn't find a place for his hands or feet in the benches. In other words, he wouldn't be able to come to terms. We would have a problem with him. Why? Because we have another halacha that Rabbi Yochanan says, and those two opinions were not jived. When brothers split up the Yerusha, father dies, and there's, let's say, 5 brothers, and they split up the land. What's their halacha? Is that their permanent land? In other words, each one, you have Reuben, Shimon, let's say 4 brothers, Reuben, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda. They split up the land, or let's say Reuben's not a Bechor, whatever it is, 4 brothers, 1, 2, 3, 4. They split up the land. Is that the land that was meant for them to be? In other words, and they don't have to give it back in Yovel? Rabbi Yochanan says no. They're like purchasers. Rashi explains the Ein Breira. How do you know which was meant for him? The brothers split it up, right? The brothers split up the land. They have a lottery, or they go to the lawyer and he works it out, and you take there's 4 fields, A, B, C, D. Number 1 takes A, number 2 takes B, and so on and so forth. But they split it up. Well, is that the land that was meant for them to be? That's only for Yesh Breira. The old Ein Breira, how do you know he got the right land? What they have to do is, Rabbi Yochanan says, at Yovel, they resplit it. They put it all back in the pot and they resplit it again. Okay, now, we get back. If you say kinyan peres is not Rabbi Yochanan's kinyan is kikuf, if you say, listen carefully, if you say kinyan peres is lafki kinyan guftami, now listen very carefully what I'm saying. According to Rabbi Yochanan, when they split up a field, right? The father dies, they split it up. They got in Yovel, they got to put it back in the pot and do it all over again. Every Yovel, they got to do it back in the pot. That means that what do they have? Do they really own the land? No. Kinyan peres. All they have is a kinyan peres. They can use the land, they can get the produce, but they don't really own the land. Now, if that's the case, how do they ever when they bring Bikurim on from that land in Eretz Yisrael, when they bring Bikurim, how do they make a bracha? Right? If you hold like Rish Lakish, maybe the Ein Korei, right? If Rabbi Yochanan would say that Kinyan Paris is lavka Kinyan Guftami, and they don't really own it. That's what Rav Shlokish said. Rav Shlokish says, and Mocha Paris maybe you bought maybe the Eina Kore because you don't really own it. Now, if you say since he holds that the brothers don't really own it, listen carefully. The brothers don't really own it, so they only have a Kinyan Paris. If Rabbi Yochanan knows Kinyan Paris is Kinyan Guftami, okay, it's like Kinyan Guftami. They can make the bracha. They can say the psukim when they bring the bikurim. But if he would hold, if Rabbi Yochanan, who on the one hand holds that the brothers have to resplit it every Yovel, that means that they just have a Kinyan Paris. And if he would hold the Kinyan Paris as Lafka Kinyan Guftami, how would any male Jews who own land in Eretz Yisrael, which was coming down from Yoshua all the way down, how could they ever read the psukim? They don't really own it. They got to give it back in Yovel. The only way it would work out, lo mishkachas, look at the Gemara. Nobody would bring bikurim and read the bracha. It doesn't mean lo mishkachas maybe b'korei. Ella. The only ones who would be ella chad bar chad ad Yoshua nun. The only way it would work out is listen carefully. If at the time of Yoshua, we have a guy called the Moshe. Moshe got a piece of land. Moshe had only one son, right? So there was nobody to split it up with. He doesn't have to give it back, right? It's his. At Yovel, he keeps it anyway, right? It's his permanently. Moshe had only one son. That son only had one son. That son only had one son. And going all the way down to modern times, it was only that's the only one who would be maybe B'korei because he really owns it. If there would be two brothers at any point in time, they'd have to split it up again. Then you only have a Kinyan Paris and you can't make a bracha. Elamai, it must be that since Rabbi Yochanan holds Achan Shecholka, they got to give it back in Yovel, which means they only have a Kinyan Paris. He must also hold like we had that Rabbi Yochanan holds Kinyan Paris is Kinyan Guftami. Therefore, even though the brothers, no matter how many brothers are, they split it up and they got a big back in Yovel, but they have the Kinyan Paris. They can use the Paris. Kinyan Paris is Kinyan Guftami, like Rabbi Yochanan says, and therefore they could make the bracha. All he's saying is that since Rabbi Yochanan says Achan Shecholka they got to resplit it at Yovel, it must be that he also holds Kinyan Paris Kinyan Guftami. Because if he holds Kinyan Paris Guftami, nobody would ever, no Jew would ever have to read the psukim when he brings the bikurim. Because since he's got to split it with his brothers, right? He only has a Kinyan Paris, and if Kinyan Paris Kinyan Guftami, he would like Rish Lakish that he would never make the bracha. Amar Rava. Even though we just seen the Gemara seem to say, and in general we hold that Machlokes Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, we go usually like Rabbi Yochanan, the more superior authority. And over here the Gemara also, when I wanted to say the Machlokes is the same as Machlokes Rabbi Shimon on the one hand, Rav Meir on the other hand is the same Machlokes, and we said no, everybody go Kinyan Guftami. It sounds like we're trying to say like Rabbi Yochanan. Still, the Gemara says now in the last line on Mem Ches and Aleph, Amar Rava Krom Masnisa Masai Rish Lakish. The pasuk and a brisa are proof to Rish Lakish that maybe the Eino Kori, that Kinyan Paris is lav to Kinyan Guftami. Like Ram seems to pass in Rish Lakish. If you look back on yesterday's up, maybe the Eino Kori. Why? Because Kinyan Paris is lav to Kinyan Guftami. How do we see that? The pasuk are now on Mem Ches and base. It says B'mispar Shnei Tubosi Macher. Right, we talk about Shnas Yovel. Shnas Yovel. You have to you apportion the land. You pay him according to the number of when he deems the land. He has to get according to the number of years left. It doesn't say years. It says Mishmash Shnei Tvos, the years of produce. Mashma, that the key is the produce. Right, you go according to the produce, not according to Machalach. In other words, it's just sold for the produce. It's not Mashma that's only Kinyan Paris is Laf Kinyan Guftami. Alma ain't gufa karka, says Rashi. The land itself, right? The guf, the hard land itself is not really sold. It's foolish. What you're really selling is the produce, right? When you're talking about redeeming it back. So you sell when you redeem it back, you pay according to how many years of produce you left. Smash what was sold was the produce. What was sold was the produce, not the land itself. That's the proof in other words, it's a hint from the pasuk. In the brisa we see that Tanya, listen to this. A man sold his field, right? Man sold his field, and he died. He left 3 sons, right? What happens in Yovel? It goes back to the sons, right? One of the sons is Reuben Shimon Levi. Reuben is a Bechor. Bechor gets how much? Pishtayim. Okay, but a Bechor only gets Pishtayim in what's extent there. Not what's coming. Let's say Let's say the father died and he left some assets, and he also had Uncle Lou owed him some money also, right? It's not here right now. Uncle Lou doesn't have the money yet. He's going to pay him back. Does the Bechor get a double share in there? No. He only gets Mishimas, only what's there, not what's Roi to come. Not some windfall is going to come later on, or some great uncle is going to die. The Bechor only gets Mishnah in that. Here he says, if the father sold the field, right, and it comes back, Bechor not Mishnah, even though the father died now, and the sons are going to get the field back in Yovel, right? The father sold the field, let's say in year 40 of Yovel. In year 41, the father died. 8 years later, 9 years later is Yovel, right? Then the field's going to come back to the family. Does the Bechor get a double share in that? He says yes. Bechor noto pishnayim b'sada chozeres la'ava b'Yovel, right? The Bechor gets a double share in the field that goes back in Yovel. Why? Because the purchaser who bought it from his father in year 40 never, all he had was a kinyan Paris. If it was kinyan aguf, then if he really owned it, then why would a Bechor get a double share when it comes back in year 50? It was only Roy to come back. They didn't own it. The time that he died, the father, you only get a double share in the assets that are there at the time of death, not that are going to come later on. LMI, you see that a kinyan Paris that the purchaser had is only is lav kinyan aguf. I mean, and the field really is still in the possession of the family. And that's why Bechor gets a double share. Amar Bai, and we have a tradition. A wife has assets, brings assets into the marriage, and the husband can work in, he gets the produce, etc. Tzarech Hashem needs an authorization from her when he negotiates on her behalf. If there's some din Torah or whatever that they have about her field, he needs authorization, right? Why? Because she owns the field. He only has kinyan Paris. So who's he authorized to negotiate the field? Right? That's only if the main purpose was about the field, the ownership of the field, not about the Paris. But if the argument, the din Torah was about Peiros, since he's authorized to negotiate on her behalf because on the Peiros, which he's entitled to, he's also authorized to negotiate on the field itself, even though he doesn't have the specific authorization for that. But if he's negotiating or going to court over the field itself, which doesn't belong to him, belongs to her, he only has a kinyan Paris. You only have authorization. You only own the rights to the Paris. You don't have rights to the land. In common law, you also have a lot of these things where you sold only rights for a certain time, like, I don't know, demei mafteach or things like that. Or, today when you have your house also, in many houses, it's not private land, it's owned by Kakal. You only have a 49-year lease, etc. It's the same idea. You don't really own the land, right? Or the problems going on at the time with the church property, all these issues that are going on now, that the church property was sold to various Jews, and now when the 49 years is up, they say, you have an apartment on the 20th floor, but we own the land. You don't own the land. All right. Now we learned we're going to talk now about issues that are not related to gitin per se, but they're related to the concept of neitik and olam for the betterment of society. Right? A lot of these halachas we said was for the betterment of society. We say do this and do that, even though midaraisa that wasn't really the case, right? Neitik and olam, we said you sell your field to a guy. We said yesterday, right? You buy back the payros for give bikurim. They can say you shouldn't be encouraged to sell land. A lot of these things for the betterment of the Jewish society in Israel. So here we have the following thing. If Reuben damages Shimon, either Reuben himself damages Shimon or his animal damages Shimon, or Shimon's property, whatever the thing was, whatever he owes him. Reuben is the mazik and Shimon is the nizik. You got to pay for it, right? If it's a human being himself who did the damage, it's necessary. If it's just his animal who did the damage, he's got to pay the damages in cash, in money. Money, what is money? What is money? So I heard a good definition of money is it's the most liquid asset in a given place and time. That's the best thing. Nothing replaces money. Everybody wants, cash is always the best. Money is money. With money, you can buy everything, right? Money is money. So that's the best thing. If the guy doesn't have any money, though, what do? So you go back and you take his assets, right? The mazik, there's no cash. The Bezdin assessed that he did $1,000 worth of damage. He doesn't have $1,000, but he's got fields. Okay. So when it comes to damage, Shama be this. You give him the best fields. The best fields, he's got to pay back for the best. What do you mean best? there's superior fields, average fields, and inferior, the worst fields. So when it comes to Nezikin, we're going to explain all this is also people should be discouraged and be careful about damaging other people. So what the halach is, you got to pay for your best field. Masaki, you got a good field, you got to pay the best field. You got to pay your best property. Now, we don't mean in value, we'll see. We don't mean in value. $1,000 is $1,000. A small, let's call it a quarter acre of your best field is the same $1,000 value as a full acre of your worst field, right? We're not talking about in value. We're talking about, but it's a person would rather have the better field, rather have a quarter of an acre of a good field, the best field, rather than a full acre of the worst field. So Nesakon Shamlem, he's assessed with the best field. Ubachov, a creditor, if the guy can't pay back, I lent you money, you can't pay back. I want cash. You don't have cash? I'll go take your field, an average field. So Basisha Baziburas, a woman we're assuming would rather be married. So if you can't, if you don't have any cash to pay off the ksuba, you can pay with your worst field. We'll talk about all this will be explained in detail in the Gemara. Rav Meir says even Basisha is paid with baininess like a balchov. We don't pass like Rav Meir. However, this rule that we say you pay for the better field, the average field, worst field, that's only if you have to collect from Nechasim Mishubanim. What does Nechasim Mishubanim mean? That there's a lien on this property, right? Somebody had a prior lien. It was sold after the loan or after the damage took place. But if the person who has to pay, the mazik or the debtor or the husband, whoever has to pay over here, he has free assets that are not encumbered to somebody else. They don't belong, they don't in somebody else's possession. Then I feel even if he has the worst field. In other words, the first thing is cash. You have no cash, we'll go after your fields. You have no fields that you can give me right now because they've already been sold or given to somebody else. Then we'll go after them and we'll take the best one. But if there's any fields that you have that are not in somebody else's possession, I'll go after those fields if you have no cash. Yisomim, let's say the mazik died, the mazik damaged you, or the debtor owes you money and he died. And you have to go for Yisomim, you only take from the worst fields, because for the Yisomim, we make a takana for them. They can't argue, etc. So you only take the worst fields. We haven't described yet who's the best field. The best fields are the mazik and the nizik. We'll talk about that. Let's say you somebody stole my field and sold the field to an innocent purchaser. Now, when I come to collect my field, it's my field. I got a deed over here. I'm going to take it back. Now, when I take it back, I'm taking it back with the fruits, everything that's on it. It's my field. I'm taking that field back. What's going to happen now? The purchaser who bought it from the Ganef, from the Goslin, is going to go after the Goslin, right? And he's going to say, I put this money in, and I have all these fruits. Okay, maybe the owner of the field will pay for whatever fertilizer you used, etc. But the fruits are worth a lot of money. When you collect those, when the purchaser goes after the Goslin for the fruits, that you can only collect. We'll see. Ein motziin lachilas peiros for the fruits or the shvach or any improvement that he did. Ulemazanish v'abanos takanas ksubas that you have to feed the wife and children after divorce. But you don't collect it from the chasim mishubarim, from encumbered property. They tikkun olam. We'll see also all these things are for the betterment of society. The Gemara is going to explain what all this is. What that is. And here's another common one we've had before. Let's say you find somebody's wallet in the street. The guy says, "Oh, you know what? Here's your wallet." And the guy says, "Okay, could you, some of the money's missing." So you make the guy swear? No, you don't make him swear that he didn't steal anything, because otherwise people aren't going to be encouraged to return stuff. So that's also a tikkun olam for the betterment society. All these halachas, tikkun olam is really going on everything, even the ones that weren't specifically mentioned in the Mishnah at the beginning. So tikkun olam. Says the Gemara, what do you make tikkun olam? When it comes to damage, the pasuk says, "Ki avrish v'shilach asbiru l'sadacher meitav sadei meitav kami yishalim." You got to pay the best. If I do damage to you, I caused a fire or a pit or something like that, and to damage your field, it says I got to pay the best. So what do you mean? They tikkun olam, a damager should pay from the best fields that he has. They tikkun olam daraisis medaraisis said meitav sadei meitav kami yishalim. You got to pay the best one. So it's a pasuk. It's a pasuk. What do you mean? It's a tikkun olam here. So one answer is we'll see. Some things could be, we'll say later on, are that the Torah said do it so form and they tikkun olam. But the Pashut Pshat tikkun olam is it's a drabanan. The rabbi said for the betterment of society you should do this, but the question of this is really the raisa. Pasuk just made them stand that comes. Amar Rabbi L'tzrich Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel says mid raisa b'the nizik shamina. In a raisa, let's say the very best field of the nizik, the one who was damaged, is equal to the worst field. It's got, in other words, his best field. You have, it's all relative, right? I have good fields, average fields, worst fields. Let's say I was damaged, and my best field is equal to the worst field of the masik. So does the masik pay the best or the worst? Does he pay his best, or does he pay the best of the nizik? When you look at the best of the nizik, Kamash Malan, they take it on Shimon and Mazik. Rabbi Shmuel says, Minaraisa, you only have to pay the best that the nizik had. Kamash Malan, they take it olam, that's what we mean over here, that's a tikkun olam. Minaraisa, yes, you have to pay the best, only the best of the nizik. Kamash Malan, they take it olam, you pay the best of the mazik. Even though the mazik had much better fields than the nizik. Again, we're going to assume up here we're talking about even the value. We're going to come out. The value is the same. It's the same $1,000. But with Kamash one, that Shamina b'mazik, we pay the mazik's best field. My Rabbi Shmuel. So first we understand what do you mean by Rabbi Shmuel? What did he say? The Tanya made say Mishal made say or Shanizik. You have to pay the best of the nizik. Or made Kamar Shanizik. Rabbi Shmuel. In other words, you pay the best field that he had, the best field that he had. That's what you have to pay. Rabbi Kiva says no. The pasuk is just telling you that you don't collect more. It's come to be machmer. It's not going to be machmer to pay more than you damage. We're assuming now in the half a minute that according to Rabbi Shmuel, you pay even more than you damage. Meaning, if I let's say you had a lousy patch of a lousy garden patch over here of tomatoes or whatever, and that's what I ruined. I got to give you better ones. And Rabbi Kiva says, no, the pasuk can be machmer like that. Just telling you have to pay from these, you have to pay your best one. Ella to collect Shiur, the maintenance, Kamoshi, you got to pay whatever the value is. In Kavachomer lahektish. Tomorrow's Gemara, we'll see what the Kavachomer lahektish means, what that means. But according to Rabbi Shmuel, it sounds like that you pay the best that the nizik had. Meaning, even if I damage lousy tomatoes, I got to give you back good tomatoes. In other words, it sounds like I got to give you back more value than I damaged. Sounds like I damaged $500. I'll give you back $1,000. Well, Rabbi Shmuel, I understand. If I damage, I consume a good shmeina means a fat, a good one, good tomatoes. I got to pay back good tomatoes. And if I consume bad tomatoes, I also have to give you back good tomatoes. Does that make sense? How does that work? Why should I have to pay back more? Doesn't make sense. Says no. My skin what happened was let's say my shore went and damaged one patch of your garden. I don't know what he damaged over here. You've got good ones and bad ones. I don't know which one. We don't know. It's gone now. The shore ate them all up. Right? Your animal ate them all up. The Mishal made he's got to pay whatever the best ones. The Nizik says, I had all kinds of good ones. You probably ate one of my best ones. You got to give me back ones. If we know that he ate a bad one, he consumed that one, Misham Kushi would pay a bad one. Now that we don't know, Misham Shei's got to pay the best one. Right? What happened over here was Reuben Shore ate up a patch in Shimon's field. And we don't know, we were saying we don't know if it was a good one or a bad one. Well, if we knew it was a bad one, you don't have to pay a bad one. Now that we don't know, he's got to pay the best. Why? Let him prove it. Shimon wants to get paid by Reuben. We're on Mem test now. We're not talking about that you have to pay back more than you damage. That's not what Rabbi Shmuel is saying. That if I get $500 worth of damage, I got to give you $1,000 just because you're not sure. What kind of sense does that make? Like we said before, the best field of the nizik was like the worst field of the mazik, of the damager. Rabbi Shmuel said, but nizik shamina. No, what we do is you pay like the best of the nizik, and notice the mazik only has to pay like his ziburs, like his worst field, not in value. We're not changing the value. If I damaged $500, I pay $500. If I damage $1,000, I got to pay $1,000. But is the $1,000 do I pay from my best fields? I got much better fields than you. I was the one who did the damage, but my worst field is like your best field. So Bishmuel says, Midaraisa, I only have to pay like your best field. Again, the value is the same, but the question is, people would rather have good stuff. Rabbi Kiva suffered a mazik shamina. No, Rabbi Kiva says no. I have to pay my best field. My time. What's Rabbi Shmuel's reasoning? It says Nemra Sarah Lamata. It says Ubiyar b'stay acher. Kishlach ish beirov, right? Ubiyar b'stay acher. What's the stay acher? That's the niziks, right? You damage somebody else's field. It says Salamata. Nemra Sarah Lamala. Masar Amur Lamala. That's the Sadeh acher. It says here Sadeh acher. Here it says Sarah Lamata, and there it says Sarah Lamala. What's Sarah Lamala? Where it says b'stay acher, and then it says Meitav Sadehu Yikram. That's Lamata. Just like Lamala, when I says a beer b'stay acher, that's the nizik. Afsadamur Lamata, the nizik. That's Rabbi Shmuel. I only have to pay nizik. And then we said, right, but the Tikkun Rabbanan is you got to pay even the mazik. Rabbi Kiva suffer Meitav Sadehu Yishalem. The Hayach, the Kumashalem, Meitav Sadehu Yishalem. Who's the one who pays the mazik? Sadehu is the mazik's field. So Rabbi Kiva says, Midaraisa, you got to pay the best field, the field of the mazik. Rabbi Shmuel says, Midaraisa, you have to pay the nizik's best stuff, right? The Rabbanan came along and said, no, that you got to pay the mazik. Rabbi Shmuel, Ahani Gzeir Shav, which tells you pay the niziks. Ahani Gzeir Shav, like we said, you pay only basically niziks. Ahani Kroi, the Islay, the mazik, let's say, we say, right, the pasuk tells you only have to pay the best of the nizik, even though that's the equivalent of the mazik ziboris. But let's say the mazik has good field, superior and inferior, edus for ziboris, but his ziboris is low shabikidus nizik. His ziboris is not as good as the edus of nizik. Then the mashal meita, then he has to pay his best one. If he only has good and bad, superior and inferior, and his inferior is not as good as the nizik's edus, then he's got to pay the higher one. So that's what Rabbi Shmuel will use it for. So that's what we're saying over here. And they take it over to the Raisa. He says, no, Midaraisa, Rabbi Shmuel, you pay like the nizik's best. The Mashmuel, we pay them. If the mazik has even better stuff than nizik, stuff that nizik doesn't even have such good stuff, he has to pay from his field. That's the tikkun olam. That's the tikkun olam. So the mazik should be careful not to damage somebody else. But the value is the same. You did $1,000 worth of damage, you got to pay $1,000. All right, we'll pick up here tomorrow. So Rabbi Kiva, Omer Lo Ba Pasuk, I'll leave us on the second. We'll explain Rabbi Kiva tomorrow.